Recently I dealt with a Retina IIIC 028N was the type number, and it was the ones that was made up out of spare parts, and they went to Kodak VIPs as far as I know, and there were only 150 or something of them, something like that. Now this camera I have here is not one of those. This is a standard production model 3 big C. The late type, it's got no mark along the top there, no indentation. There's normally a fold at that point on the earlier ones. So this is certainly a late type. I've checked the serial number, it's relatively late in manufacturing. This would be an example of the last of the Retina IIICs that were manufactured. Note that it does have the proper aluminium insert in there for the film cassette, unlike the odd one, that spare parts monster. I'm just going to check over the rest of it and see if I can spot anything that's unusual. I'm going to get into it. So this one's here for servicing, of course. In this case the shutter certainly doesn't want to play nicely. Just checking the state of that rewind knob there. Let's have a look at that, because there's something odd about the one on the spare part monster. Let's see how this looks. That looks much the same actually. Yep. There's something odd, some slight difference there. I'm not quite picking. I'd have to go back and look at my video. But no, that's fine. The top of the meter. Let's just check the state of this. Okay. I can see by a slight scratch on the top of that knob that someone's had this off before. That probably means the camera's been serviced before. Oh, look at this. This is an odd one. Yes, someone certainly serviced this before. It's got the wrong screw in the end of the top housing. Oh, well, I had hoped that this was a nice pristine example we could use to determine the ins and outs, but that's not going to be. Let's see if we can get that screw out. Kodak certainly were not using crosshead screws. Let's see if I can get under this one, which is not only the wrong screw head size, it's the wrong thread size too, so it's just been jammed in the hole is about the best you could say for it. Yeah, so a bit of rubbish there. We're not off to a flying start. Now if I hold my finger on the top of the meter so I don't displace it while I lift the top cover off, that's the best policy with any of these 3Cs, so that you don't damage anything. That little rubber buffer is very important. That's glued in the corner here at the top of the top housing, and that holds down on the meter and holds it firmly in place. So if you see a little crescent of rubber come out from underneath the top cover, it's important and you need to put it back. Something nasty going on here. See all this white stuff here? That looks like corrosion to me. It suggests that this may have been for a swim, or at least been out in the rain. there's another patch of something nasty here too. I don't know what that is. It's not quite corrosion. Look at that. It's something that's dried or crystallised there. I don't know what it is. It certainly suggests that some liquid has found its way into the camera. And it could be anything. Could have been a soft drink. It certainly wasn't just plain water. There's a bit of grit and stuff here. Maybe some corrosion. I'm a bit surprised because this camera really did look pretty good from the outside. It's not looking so good now. That screw was a little bit loose. Take the cocking rack out. I'll just have a peer at that. I think that'll clean up okay. Cocking racks or access to cocking racks has been a bit difficult lately. But I do have some original Kodak cocking racks on hand again. That's interesting. Yeah, I will certainly have to go back and look at my earlier video now and compare what I'm seeing here and what I saw on that spare parts monster. Because it may well be that I had misjudged the spare parts monster and that some things I was seeing in there were not perhaps unusual. But I'll reserve judgment on that. That's the top of the camera pretty much dealt with. Now at the bottom of the camera, this is where I've got to get into the leatherette. We'll start by removing the back catch release cover and tripod socket surround. Those screws are fairly easily damaged. As with anything that's fairly easily damaged, they sort of disappear from people's spare parts piles pretty promptly. Now interestingly here, this has the word Germany scratched into the bottom of the advance lever there. This is, someone's been in here before. That glue is not the original adhesive. It's had two lots of adhesive on there. So someone's been in before at the base of the camera. We already know someone had been in at the top. So it remains to be seen how deep they went. Try lifting this leatherette. This is stuck fairly well. I'll try a drop of naphtha under that, see if that adhesive softens. If it does, it'll be a bonus. Yeah, it does. You have to choose your solvents wisely if you're doing a trick like this. You have to know that the solvent you're using is not going to damage the leatherette you're trying to save. That one, in that case, that went very, very well. And you saw what I did. Basically, I just dropped a splop of solvent in under the leatherette and repeated the procedure as the leatherette peeled up. And it took very little to make the adhesive let go, either because it was a magic solution of solvent, or just as likely because the adhesive had just about given up the ghost and didn't need much encouragement to let go at all. It may well have been that I could have peeled that leatherette off not much differently dry. Better safe than sorry. So out with the release lever and the lock lever, and the release lever has its little spring on it, and need to recover that because it's inclined to get damaged and lost when I've got stuff in the ultrasonic cleaner. The tripod socket, the screws loose? No, they're not. That's unusual. That one was loose. That one was not loose, but it was not tight. It wouldn't have taken much to encourage it to come loose. That's the piece that was missing in the parts monster, spare parts monster. Right, let's take this door off the front. Hinge pin screws top and bottom, and typically at least one washer in between the body and the door, and often two. Here's one washer. There's another. There's a third. When there are three, typically the heavy washer is at the top, just recover that spring, and the lighter washers are at the bottom. Well, I'd like to get that rewind knob off now, that button. Just using my special pliers to do that job. The screw that drives the film sprocket from the sprocket shaft, we'll get that out. Lift out the sprocket shaft, lift out the sprocket. Probably tip out this. This is the bush, the top of the film advance. Here we have the clutch assembly, which for reasons of its own doesn't want to lift out. There we go. There's our clutch assembly. It's got a spring in it, so it's easy to shift it in one direction, not so easy to shift it in the other. the easy to shift direction is the correct direction, so everything's good. It should never turn the other way really. Out with that screw, and there's the return spring for the rewind button catch. 3 screws here hold the film advance shaft into the camera body. They're loose. Now when they're loose, you can end up with multiple problems. If they're very loose, you can find that you have intermittent faults with your release. That when you release the shutter, sometimes it doesn't release the film advance to allow you to wind on to the next shot, simply because the film advance cam here is not sitting fixed at a correct height. We'll take that bush out of there. It's starting to look a bit more stripped down now. And I want the shutter out of the front of this body, so which is the shutter was the main fault with this camera, or the main obvious fault was the shutter. So I'll just use my magic tool, which you can't purchase because they are not commercially available. The shroud for the gear that drives the shutter, cocks the shutter, it's held in place with 2 screws. Lift that out and the gear. There's a shim washer from the back of the shutter. I'll pop that with the shutter so it doesn't get misplaced. This ring serves 2 purposes. It locates the shutter so it cannot revolve in the mount, and it has an arm on it which comes back here to couple to the rangefinder, so that as the focus is racked forward, this obviously moves forward with it, and it pulls that arm with it and pulls on the rangefinder. So marking the position of the helical here, I normally scribe a line across that. And I'm interested in 2 things: making sure that I know the correct position of the focus scale ring on the outer helical, and making sure I know the relative position of the outer helical and the inner helical. And I normally set that up so that when the outer and the inner helical are at the same height, I scribe a line across there, which is right there. So normally I scribe 2 lines across the bottom, 1 across the top. So now I can get those 3 components back correctly positioned, which means that if the camera was correctly focused prior to me taking it apart, it'll be correctly focused after it's reassembled. And generally speaking, when you find them, they were correctly focused. Just occasionally, if you come across a camera that somebody who didn't know what they were doing has been playing with, they may have put things back in the wrong place, in which case the camera was relatively useless. Or somebody may have had the shutter out to service it and failed to put the shims back on the back of the shutter, which would affect the accuracy of your focus. It's easy to lose track of the fact that although those paper shims look pretty thin, they are thick enough to make a difference to the focus at the film plane. If somebody swaps the shutter and lens assembly from one camera to another, then you can rest assured that it's unlikely that things will be correctly focused and that they're going to need to adjust something. The focus is quite smooth and free on this particular camera, although I can see that there's an awful lot of dirt and rubbish in that grease. It's certainly moving freely enough. That screw does not want to move. There we go. Any crashing and banging you hear in the background is not me. There's a house across the road getting the roof replaced. Right, so that's all of that. What more needs to come out of the body? Well, the 2 screws at the top. One screw there that holds the bracket that holds the transfer shaft in, we'll call it that. That's the shaft that takes the action from the shutter cocking rack, from the back of the camera through to the front. Right, that should lift out. It does. This is exceptionally sticky with grease. You can see great gobs of grease on there. That's a real mess. That's our shutter release. Carefully taking this out so that the buttons do not fly away under impulse of the 2 springs that push them outwards. Remove that spring there. That's the return spring for the shutter release. Earliest cameras didn't have that spring. I was doing one just today, as it happens. Earlier today I was finishing one. Right, so now I've got my camera stripped down, little bits of it everywhere, and the mechanical pieces here in the main are going to go into for cleaning. They go into be degreased first, then into the in the ultrasonic, and be dealt to with some domestic detergent after that, and they should come back looking like new parts. Well, you probably want to know what the outcome was of all of that pile of parts. Everything did get cleaned up. I didn't show you any of the reassembly because basically it was very, very boring. Straightforward, no twists, no turns, nothing really to note at all. The camera went back together fine. It's working fine now, and it's a very nice example of the late type Retina IIIC cameras, and it's in very tidy condition. I'm sure its owner will be pleased to see it finally coming home. Thanks for watching.